sign-up sheets down here up front. So if you want to speak on 494, you need to speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, at this time we're going to call the Full Transportation Committee to order. I want to ask my good friend Reverend Al Williams, as I call him, if he would, to say a prayer for us, please.
Glad to have my son here with me today. I look like my mom.
Thank God.
Oh, Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for coming together. We thank you for the opportunity to do the will of the people here in Georgia. Let us make sure and keep you in mind. Let us have humility in our actions and fairness on our minds. For it is in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you there, Reverend Williams. All right. We're going to take up House Bill 494. Representative Welch, where you want to sit? You want to sit or stand? It's up to you. It's up to you. You're going to stand, all right? Representative Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Transportation Committee, it's a privilege to be before you. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to come before you with a bill. 494 is just a modification to our essentially safety requirements for obstructions, particularly utility lines located in a very close proximity to private airstrips. As you'll see, this applies only to those airstrips which there's a glide slope. This is under lines 14 through 16, where a wire or a utility obstruction exists and penetrates the 20-to-1 glide slope. So it's a very close proximity to where a person would land on a private airstrip. And what this bill does is really three things. One, it allows a private property owner to write a letter to the utility company that has the utility line there, whether it be a large transmission line or even a small wire that is in that obstruction for flight. And naturally, the utility will have an easement to operate that, the right-of-way to operate that utility line. But the private property owner can ask the utility to place those large orange safety markers on the lines so that anyone else flying in the area, including the owner of the property that may be wanting to have a private airstrip, can identify the lines, know where they are, and if someone else is flying in the area, would identify the lines, be able to see where they are. It's a private airstrip, not public. You typically see these orange markers around public airstrips where there's utility lines running across those areas. And so all that happens is that the person, the private landowner can petition the utility to place the markers up. The private owner has to pay for the cost of the markers plus the installation of those markers. And so it won't cost the utility any money directly. It's paid for by the property owner. DOT is listed in here as kind of an arbiter of the situation, and they will establish a chart by which determines the cost per marker on a line, and they'll do that by rulemaking. And that's so that the utility couldn't raise up the cost of the markers such that the private property owner can't afford to do this. So we're trying to keep the onus on the party that's actually starting the activity of private air flight from that land. You're putting the onus back on the property owner to make those payments so that it's not costing the ratepayers anything. But you're also ensuring that anyone using that airspace around that area has adequate knowledge of the existence of the transmission line or the utility line. Now, there is a penalty provision such that if the parties is asked to do this, the utility refuses to do that, there is a $1,000 penalty per day for failure to install. There is an arbitration process by which you can go through the ALJ, present your case on a case-by-case basis and make your arguments. The property owner can do it or the utility can do it, and then that will be decided. So there is a release valve to prevent an unnecessary penalization if there are some circumstances that justify why the safety markers shouldn't be used, or why there needs to be a different scenario for that particular situation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
This time, any questions from the committee? 26, who is that? Representative Ballinger.
I'm sorry. I just had a question about the notice to the same owner of the utility line in the subsequent calendar year. What happens if there's a change in ownership?
That's right. So
Does basically it renew? So in other words, if somebody had sent a notice, but then nothing had, kind of fallen through the cracks, and so you have a new owner, can they send a letter in that same calendar year, correct?
yes, and that's I think it actually is within the calendar. You can send notice that one calendar year. If you'll point me to the line,
I'm sorry, it's line 52.
line 50.
It specifies same owner, but there's no clarification for a new owner.
Yes, and that is such that if the owner petitions the utility and the utility says, well, we think these are the size markers you need and the number of them, and the cost is too expensive for the property owner to do at that time, he or she can withdraw the application or just let it expire. But let's say later in the year, he got his tax refund. He said, I can now pay for these. He can repetition. So it's not. I didn't want it to be a one-time petition, and if you didn't put them up, then that was the only shot you had at it.
Okay, my question though was for a new owner in a calendar year.
Any owner of the property can do that. So
Okay.
once the title transfer, that person becomes the owner
Okay.
of the property, and so they could do that.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
But that's a good question. That was a concern that we had to straighten out as we were working on the bill.
Who is 15? Representative Bryant.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not being that familiar with their scripts and things like that. I'm totally, I guess, out of sync here. The line itself, the utility line, would that be in position before an airstrip is constructed?
It could be. Yes, sir. It could be. It could be before or it could be after. Either way, it won't matter. When a utility buys the easement, they typically are buying just the right to put a utility line through a defined area of land. So it could be a 100-foot wide easement. It could be 30 feet, depending on the size of the utility that's going through. So that easement applies to that land that they have purchased from the landowner of that easement. And then, of course, they have the rights within that easement to regulate and make sure that the use of the easement area is consistent with their use. But beyond the easement boundaries, and this is where the private property rights come in, beyond that easement boundary, the utility shouldn't be able to obstruct and prevent the landowner from using his or her property for a legitimate, reasonable use. And what we're trying to do here is make that use as safe as possible in the case of a private airstrip.
I'm still a little confused to why would that burden be put on the private owner
As opposed to putting the cost
on the
on the
utilities?
utility? Well, and I thought about that, and initial draft of the bills had it where the utility would pay for the cost of putting the large orange balls or markers on the utility lines. But that fundamentally didn't seem fair to me, frankly, because of the fact that it's a property owner who wants to exercise his or her property rights. And if, in the case of where the utility line already exists, there has to be some acknowledgement that it's now the responsibility of the property owner to be engaged in covering those costs. So he or she is engaging in an activity. That activity is limited to the extent that those utility lines are there. If we can make that safer, we should. I decided that it was probably better to put that onus back on the property owner. And it's voluntary, so he doesn't have to do it.
Okay, what about the private owner? Does the private owner, or is the private owner in a position to recoup financial gain from other airplane users or whoever used it? No?
No, sir. No, it would just be the private owner paying the set fee by the Department of Transportation to the utility, and then the utility has, I think, 90 days to install those lines.
All right, thank you.
And that time can be appealed as well, so there may be reasons why you need more time to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Chairman Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Welch, didn't you tell me out in the hall that that the owner was, by local ordinance, could only take off and land in one direction away from utility lines?
Yes, and we have a particular situation that came out of Henry County and Spalding County that's the source of this legislation. And in that case, the restrictions were that he had to leave and depart the property in a manner that was safe and consistent, and not inconsistent with the utility line easement. So in that particular case, the transmission line is and the airstrip run perpendicular. So it's like this: utility line here, airstrip here, and the restriction about the safety of the flight of landing and ingress and egress, so to the airstrip, landing and departing, was all that he would fly away from the airstrip, away from the transmission, take off away from the transmission line, and land at this end of the airstrip away from the transmission line, landing and then taxiing down. In that particular case, the airstrip is very long. It's a grass field, privately owned.
So the things that would be put on the lines to market is simply for emergency use only.
It would be to try to, if someone else was flying in the area, saw the landing strip, and was not aware of the transmission line, for whatever reason couldn't see it, then, which would be the case any day, the sun may be in your eyes, the markers would help to distinguish the lines and make them more visible to a flyer.
Whose transmission lines are they?
In that particular case, it's MEAG's.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Representative Welch, how many, I have a couple questions. How many private airstrips are there already? Any clue?
I think there are, for some reason, 400 and some odd, 6 in mine, but I'd have to check with Ms. Carol Klumer is here today from DOT.
And the question I have, I was looking for the section where if the utility determines the price of putting this safety measure on, and then what if they disagree on the price? What was the section about GDOT having some kind of arbitration? I couldn't find it. It's
okay. The promulgation rule is the last paragraph under section 1. It's on page 3, subparagraph G, lines 89. It talks about promulgation of rules. And under section E, which begins on page 2 at the bottom, line 60, this is where you can file written requests for review of the matter, and there's a petition, a filing fee of $50 to the department to cover this cost.
okay.
Let me.
And is it, who has the final authority? I mean, is it a binding?
The ALJ would have the final authority, but the department is to promulgate the cost chart, if you will, and I'll have to look here to find that.
So they determine the cost, and then if the landowner doesn't like it, then he goes to the ALJ.
That's correct. Generally, it's set up so that there's a fixed cost so the parties know what they're getting into when the landowner starts the process. But if the utility has an objection, they certainly can go through the administrative law procedures to voice those.
Thank you.
Chairman Reinders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Welch, for this legislation. I'm looking at line 29. Is there an engineering standard? And I don't even know if engineering is the right term.
I don't know, and there are.
It seems ambiguous, and if your point earlier was if an installation charge is going to be so high as to almost prohibit something from happening, almost using a way to not grant something, mm-hmm. I get that, but I didn't know if that was ambiguous, or is there an industry standard?
And I don't know the answer to that question. That's why we wanted to put it into the department's purview. The department will regulate and oversee public airstrips. So we actually referenced the code section dealing with public airstrips in this as some guidance on these safety markers. And the current law requires that obstructions relevant to public airstrips, and this bill deals with private airstrips, but those obstructions are to be mitigated in some way, shape, or form. And so the department, we think, is the best entity to establish those rules that would guide the number of markers and the cost of those markers.
May I continue, Mr. Chairman? Yes. Thank you so much. And I know it's unrelated, but I'd just like to get your thoughts on line 73, and then I'm going to go back to the previous line. You felt it was important enough to say all parties by certified mail or statutory overnight delivery, and I'm wondering why you didn't feel that same burden should be met in line 27, receipt of such written notice, because it's the old standard, well, I sent you something. Why would you have one standard of send me something certified on one, but not certified on another?
This is when we're dealing with the filing of I think the appeal for review of the matter. Line 73 deals with that appeal process, and when you trigger that, and which line were you referring to? The other section?
Please understand, you're saying that on line 28, the utility line shall. That's what you say on line, the owner shall. Mm-hmm. So that means you have to. But that have to is based on receipt of such a written notice that someone could just say, I sent you a written notice, but to give the owner the benefit of the doubt, the MEAG the benefit of the doubt, they don't have proof necessarily that they were in fact sent that written notice, but you're still making them do something. And I'm just saying that your standard over here on 73 by certified mail, if you're going to hold MEAG responsible by someone else's word that says, I sent it in the mail, I would think that you'd want a uniform standard that must say they must have a receipt saying they in fact did that. Just for consistency purposes.
Well, I can see I certainly see what you're saying, but please bear in mind that there's the penalty provisions that deal in paragraph F. They apply when there's been a determination that there needs to be imposed. So we don't actually get to any real punishment until you've actually gotten through that process, and then that's when the penalty comes into effect. So there could be that back and forth.
I'm just saying to keep it clean, if you're going to say, y'all shall do this, and I'm just telling you, I sent you a notice, and someone says, well, I didn't get it, the cleanest way to stop that is by get a receipt.
I certainly welcome an amendment.
Friendly amendment?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see. Who we got next? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. I was listening early on in your discussion, and I need some clarification on something. And I appreciated your compassion, Representative Welch, for someone being a little short on money and needing to get their taxes in, put this in. But I'm just trying to lots and more. I know what you think. If I got a private airstrip and an airplane, I can't afford to put in a safety strip.
No, you would be required to do that.
I know, but I'm just wondering. You were saying for a private airstrip, mm-hmm. It's a private landowner. It just seems like to me if you can't install it, you might need to reconsider your form of transportation. You know, it looks a little short when it comes time to crank up, and is this a GDOT requested bill? Is this a bill that's...
No, sir.
It's not a department request. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just wondering why the delays, why you're giving so much time to do it, and you said wait until the tax comes in. I know it's been tight the last 3 years, but by then they should have sold the plane.
Thank you, Representative. May I respond?
All right, sir.
The reference to the taxes was that to say that in answering the other representative's question about whether the property owner could withdraw his or her application or resubmit within a calendar year, it may occur that at one time when he submits and gets the letter back that says you need to pay $8,000 for the installation of these markers. He may not have had the $8,000 at the time of sending the letter, but he could reapply at a later date when he does have the $8,000. So that was only a hypothetical reference. As far as the time delays, again, this is an entirely voluntary process, except for the utility would be required to put them on. But the initiation would be on the part of the landowner. There's no mandate in here that the landowner do this, but once the landowner goes down that road and says, okay, I want you to install these, he has to make payment, and that's to avoid a cost to the ratepayers.
Representative Weeks.
Representative Welch.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I got a question. If an accident were to actually happen, would this prevent the loss of power in any way?
I couldn't speak to that.
No.
Okay.
But that would be true with any transmission line located in any public airstrip or private airstrip across the state of Georgia that already exists. So if there is a loss of power, that's not relevant to the bill, because the bill actually asks for there to be greater visual indication that there's a utility line there, so that a flyer would avoid that circumstance. And but otherwise, I'm sure if a plane crashed into a line, there would be some consequence to the users on the other end. But that exists regardless of my bill. Thank you.
Let's see, Representative Deffinbaugh.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have several questions, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
One, does the FAA have any control over private strips?
Yes, there is. There's a map that the owner of a private airstrip is required to submit it's a one-form page application to the FAA, and it's a notice that they're constructing a private airstrip, so that the FAA can put it on a map that the FAA maintains and that pilots use to understand what airspace has been affected by a private airstrip.
Is there any requirement as to what the strip will be? You know, so big, so small?
Not that I'm aware
Okay.
of, no, sir.
Then, so there's no legal control over this airfield or the private airfield at this time?
That's right, other than the requirement that they submit a notice to the federal government that they're putting one in. Now, if it infringed upon the airspace of one of the other airports and created a traffic hazard for flying, then that would be a problem, and I think that's where we would have a different scenario, but that's not the case here.
So this, in one way, is just getting the person who owns the landing strip a way of dealing with the utility company to put this up.
That's all.
And for that, we require law?
Yes, in cases where the utility company is refusing to allow that to occur, and that's why the law is being presented to you.
And then, if there is arbitration, who pays for that?
The parties would pay for it. It doesn't specify in here who winds up paying as far as a losing party or a winning party. This is supposed to be a neutral approach to it. There shouldn't be any penalties for someone seeking to utilize this and exercise their private property rights.
But the taxpayers aren't going to be paying for this arbitrator?
No.
Thank you.
Other than the fact that we already have a ALJ system put in place to hear such things. So.
And are they paid by
Taxpayers.
event, or are they on retainer?
Taxpayers. No, they're hired by the state.
Permanently.
So that to
Permanent
that
employee.
point, the correct answer is that if either party decided to exercise that ALJ option, that administrative law judge option, those individuals are already employed by the state, so it wouldn't be an additional cost, but it is a state dollar that's paid.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Welch, at this time, there's no more questions. If you don't mind, there probably will be some more. If you don't mind, stick around.
I don't.
We have 3 people signed up to speak on behalf of MEAG. I will tell you, if all of y'all are going to say the same thing, we don't care to hear from all 3 of you. We'll just, granted, y'all all are in agreement with that, but if y'all got something different to offer, we'll be glad to hear from you. Mr. Crane, we want to hear from you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, my role is just to introduce a couple of experts. I know very little. Frank Crane with MEAG Power. I do government affairs down here at the Capitol. I know many of you. MEAG is an instrumentality of the state of Georgia, providing wholesale electric power to 49 municipal electric systems around the state. About a third of you in here represent some of those cities. We've been referenced a time or two already here this afternoon, so we thought we'd take the opportunity to share with you our thoughts. I have with me today our Chief Operating Officer, Steve Jackson from MEAG, who is responsible for our transmission system. We own 13,000 miles of transmission lines around the state. And accompanying Steve to offer the legal side of things would be Peter Floyd, an attorney here in Atlanta with Austin and Burrs. So if the chairman will allow and this microphone works, we'll have them seated at the table and present their case.
Sure. Y'all want to both come up at the same time? Okay. Mr. Floyd and Mr. Jackson. Make sure that's turned on. There you go. Okay?
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak. And we agree with Representative Welch that the main issues here with this bill are property rights and, most importantly, safety. As the committee members likely know, electric transmission and distribution line owners in the state are own right-of-way, have easement rights that they have to locate their transmission lines on that property. And they're very interested in protecting their lines and the people and businesses that are served by those lines, both from an economic perspective and a public safety perspective. And I've been asked to briefly summarize our three main concerns with the bill. But there's a theme that runs through all three main concerns, and it's that the bill oversimplifies the safety issue and assumes that markers make the situation safer in all instances. The first concern is that this is really a private issue and that both the utility line owner and the property owner have legal remedies already. Now, as Representative Welch pointed out, this stems from a local dispute in the Spalding County, Henry County area where MEAG has owned a right-of-way easement for many years. The line's been in place for many years, and an airstrip owner has applied for marker balls. In this particular case, there were unusual safety concerns, which we'll give you more details about. And the primary concern, though, is that the private strip and the activities on the private strip are too close to the existing high voltage line, and that the marker balls in and of themselves do not make the situation safer. They actually could make it less safe by giving a false sense of security both to the pilot that regularly uses it and in the emergency situation that was discussed earlier, someone who's not familiar with the area. We're also concerned that the operation of that facility in relation to the line is not in compliance with FAA regulations. There's not requirements, but there have been recommendations made respecting this particular strip. We've actively communicated with the airstrip owner. We have an open offer to the airstrip owner to have an independent safety inspection done to help resolve the situation, to get a better understanding of what needs to be done to make this situation safe. They haven't taken us up on that, but that offer is still outstanding. The second primary concern is that it's not necessary. Utility line owners routinely install safety markers and other safety equipment on request when it's necessary, and with the limited exception of what I just described, when the equipment is not going to help the situation or may make the situation worse. Additionally, I mentioned earlier that there are legal remedies both for the utility line owner and for the landowner. The landowner could bring an inverse condemnation action against the utility. The utility could try to exercise its easement rights if necessary. We haven't gotten to that point in the disputing case in question, but that's certainly something and options that are available to both of those parties. Finally, and the third main point is that in considering the bill itself, it needs to be considered from a broader safety perspective, and it doesn't currently address those unsafe conditions that might be present that aren't cured by balls. I say balls, markers. They're typically the big orange balls on the lines. There are some potential refinements we might suggest, but frankly, we have just reviewed the bill yesterday, and there may be further improvements that might be able to be made. One potential refinement might be to require that a safety study be done in certain conditions. For example, if the line is within a certain proximity of the airstrip. I'm going to turn it over to Steve so as not to take over too much of your time, but I'm here and available to answer any questions either now or while he's speaking, but he has some specific examples and information for you to consider as well.
Thank you again for giving us a chance to speak. Just briefly, placing marker balls only addresses the fact that the line exists near the airstrip. There are other issues related to the location of the airstrip, the orientation of the airstrip and the line that can create other safety issues. And the drawing, the diagram that which you provided you gives you an example of an airstrip that actually crosses underneath a 500,000 volt transmission line, the highest voltage transmission lines we have in the state. So this creates multiple concerns with takeoffs and landings. As was mentioned earlier, the county requested that they restrict the directions of takeoff and landings. But when you look at the fact that these are 80-foot structures, they have multiple levels of wires on them. If you were landing in a direction towards those towers and you had to abort your landing, then you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation trying to avoid these structures. So in this case, we see there are multiple issues associated here that marker balls will not address. In the case of the FAA, as we mentioned, there are no FAA requirements for private airstrips, but they did recommend in their aeronautical study that they did for the site that you have a clear path 20-to-1, a clear approach path, a 20-to-1 path they call it, which is 20 feet from the obstruction for every foot of height that of the obstruction. So in this case, as we've marked on the drawings, you would expect that the runway should end 1,600 feet from the obstruction. And in this case, you can see it doesn't. So those kind of factors that we need to, when we look at these individual situations, that need to be taken into account. As Peter mentioned, we do handle these currently on a case-by-case basis. The protective measures needed may be different. So as we look at a bill like this that's kind of a one-size-fit-all approach, we just don't see that as really achieving the safety that we would want to in these situations where you have these lines in the close proximity to a private airstrip. So that's kind of the technical side of our concerns, and I'll stop at that point. I think that covers it enough. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Peter, I don't know if you have any final comments.
Well, just to reiterate that we appreciate the opportunity to have testified, and we appreciate Representative Welch shining a light on the importance of high voltage safety and the interaction they can have with aircraft. We just think that this particular bill, given the current practices, isn't necessary, and if it is to be considered, it needs to be studied further to determine if there are additional safety measures that need to be layered into it to address these atypical concerns, but concerns that are present in this current situation that brought us here.
You have questions. Chairwoman Shelton.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming today and testifying. And I just have a couple of questions. I know that on this particular airstrip, or I guess any other airstrip that's in the state, maybe, are they approved by the county, by the local governments? Do they have to approve that?
In this case, I believe the property owner needed some sort of special exception approved for zoning purposes, but I don't know that the county in every case requires that. I think it would depend on what their zoning ordinances are in that particular case.
So in this case, did they get a special zoning ordinance passed?
They did,
They
over MEAG's strong objection.
So the local officials in Henry County approved the airstrip, knowing the conditions of the location of the airstrip.
County,
or Spalding.
And they did put a number number of special requirements on the property that we don't feel have been fully complied with by the landowner. So we believe they're in violation of the law at this point.
Have you, and and I know that we've talked about, placing the markers for safety, and the landowner, so in this bill, the landowner would be the one responsible for purchasing them and would even pay for installing. Is that correct?
That's our understanding.
That's our understanding. So really would just be the utility would need to provide so I guess my question, why would that be a problem if the landowner is going to purchase and pay for the installation?
Well, in this case, we feel like it creates a false sense of safety in this situation with these high voltage lines. As was mentioned earlier, if you talk about there was a requirement that they only take off and land in a certain direction. But if you have these markers on this line, then someone who's not familiar with this airstrip may deem that this is a safe airstrip to land on. We are not convinced that's the case. So we feel like it's creating a false sense of safety in this case. That's why we have proposed a safety study be done in this particular case to try to make sure we all understand what would be needed.
So would you be held liable if there was an accident?
I don't believe that we would be.
There is, however, a risk, and
right.
frankly, even if we weren't, we have a public safety concern, and additionally, I'm not sure how many customers, businesses, and residences would be out of service for an extended period of time. But so putting liability aside, it would harm a great many people.
Yeah, but we have I just want to clarify where we're at. We have a airstrip that was approved by a local government with special ordinances, and we have an owner. I guess this bill would require the owner to purchase the markers and to install them. And but you guys are just going to decide that you're going to overrule the private property owners' rights here?
Well, we're a private property owner and have rights as well. We have an easement. That easement specifically and expressly addresses the easement rights of safe and proper utilization of the easement. So we don't necessarily agree with the description of our rights end at the easement boundary if what's being done on the adjacent property is creating a real and present safety risk to the line itself. In most cases, I think as we testified before, if someone applies for a safety feature, a utility owner is going to do that if they don't have safety concerns. In this case, we have safety concerns, including concerns that they are violating that local ordinance.
So you're saying that your responsibility doesn't end at the easement. So how far away from the easement do you have control over? Is it 100 feet, 50 feet, a mile? I mean...
Well, we would say that if we were enforcing our easement rights, a Superior Court judge would determine that. So there's already a legal process.
All right, well, I'm going to ask a question now. So to kind of make sure I understand along Chairwoman Sheldon's lines, you believe that you should have rights to property adjacent to your lines?
We don't believe that. We think that is the case.
Okay. Chairman Reinders.
I was going in a whole other direction. You don't believe that, but you think that's the case?
We don't believe that we should. We believe that we do. In this case? In this particular case. In most instances, I believe that a airstrip owner is going to install their airstrip in a way that is in accordance with the recommendations of the FAA and satisfy any local zoning conditions. In this case, they have done neither. And we continue to be concerned that not only do the balls not satisfy the safety concern, but that they may add additional safety risk because they give a false sense of security that it is safe, especially to pilots who aren't the owner.
All right. I just, again, that wasn't what I wanted to ask, Mr. Chairman, but I'd like to go down the path here just a little bit. I sincerely appreciate the case-by-case argument. I truly do. The hardest thing that all of us have to do is write Georgia law where one size fits all, whether it's in education, health care, because it does change from city to city, county to county. I appreciate that. I don't appreciate, and I'm not accusing you of this, the people that we see all the time come up here, and it's always no, 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 because in their mind they're giving up some of that control. And they dig in, frankly, even when they're wrong. So with that as a background, is it your professional opinion today? It is your recommendation today, because you said it gives a false sense of safety, the safety markers at this particular site. Correct? You've said that twice.
Yes.
So it's your position today that no marker should be used on that line?
Yes.
Because of false sense of safety? Okay.
That's what we have.
That's your position right now?
And with the caveat that we have proposed to have a review done at the site by a safety expert.
I understand.
And
But
so-
your position is this would give you a false sense of security on the site?
Yes.
Yes. Because when you talked to me in the hall earlier, it was where the markers were placed. Remember that conversation? Okay, maybe not. Let's move on a case-by-case basis, because that's what was said, that where they were located. So I don't know if they're needed or if they're not. I would know that in Henry County or any other county, but I'm looking for a consistency in the thought process. Let's do that FAA other 20-to-1 standards.
Yes.
That you also referenced. Are there any other places in the state that don't meet that FAA guideline that you've approved?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so that there are no others. Not that you're aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
So this is one of those standards. When I asked earlier the question, are there uniform standards?
I mean, there is for public airstrips. There is not for private airstrips. There are no. The FAA made this recommendation. We think in this case it's a valid recommendation, and so we.
So you agree with it in this case?
I think we would agree with it in any case when you're that close to a transmission line.
Okay.
That's why we're saying you need to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis.
And I am not your enemy. Please know that.
Oh,
I'm
no,
just
I
trying
understand.
I'm just trying to find the consistency here. How long have you been doing this?
Myself?
MEAG with lines.
Oh, well, we've been owners of transmission line for 30 plus years.
And in my opinion, this probably isn't your first rodeo with these kind of issues. And the point would be, why wouldn't you have some kind of minimum standard that you could present to Henry County, Spalding County, Jones County? It doesn't matter. Why wouldn't you have some kind of that says, you know what, the FAA says 20-to-1, this says this, and this says this. Why wouldn't you want to at least have those minimum standards that you could bring in front of people like us and say, this is it? Because if you do the case by case, you may give the false impression that you just want to do that to intentionally say no.
Well, and we did bring those recommendations in front of the Spalding County Commission.
But why wouldn't you
They're
have a
based
uniform standard in writing? Since you've done this for 30 years, 40 years, I got to believe you've had those kind of arguments before from one community to the next. Maybe not as many as I might think or someone else's, but they've come up before. It would seem like to me that y'all would be proactive and take some of these issues off the table that have a bare minimum kind of standard.
I think
Is that illogical?
No, it's not illogical, and I would just want to answer that question. The instance where there is a additional safety concern with installing marker balls is so infrequent that it is not something where, as I'm aware of, any of the utilities have found it necessary to have a uniform standard. It is very atypical that there is a safety marker request when that doesn't make sense. This happens to be a case, and then the problem we have with the bill is that because this happens occasionally, that you need to have at least some exception, whether it's the DOT making that decision or someone else that addresses the exception.
And I couldn't agree with you more. But my point is, I've got to assume that y'all have to have minimum safety standards. You've made these arguments before somewhere else.
And we generally follow the FAA
and when we write law,
standards.
we write resolutions, we do it every day that might say something like, and for other purposes. You can come up with a minimum standard and put an asterisk at the bottom that says, except where mitigating circumstances apply, or other circumstances may apply. I mean, I just would think that you want to do that to cover yourself to avoid these kind of things. Is that not true? Why wouldn't you do that?
Well, we have standards for construction of power lines. We rely on the FAA or the DOT standards. When you look at for airstrips and airstrips locations public use airstrips. There's just no rules right now that deal with private airstrips.
And all I'm saying is, if I were you, I'd be the ones that'd be proactive and help make those rules. That's all my point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Runners. Let's see. Representative Deffenbaugh. Let's see, number 9.
Thank you, Chairman. Who was there first?
MEAG.
Our transmission line.
The chicken. Were they, or did they approach you before construction?
They did. And they first contacted us, I believe, in 2009. They went before the Spalding County Zoning Commission, which we appeared at along with Georgia Power and testified.
For or against?
Against, but the end result was that I believe our testimony resulted in a number of special conditions on the zoning that are in place now that we don't believe are fully complied with.
Well, that's between them and
sure, and
someone else.
We've communicated with the property owner along the way, and most recently we sent them a letter in September of 2012 that explained very clearly what our concerns were and made the offer I mentioned earlier of having an independent safety study done to help resolve this.
How many markers have you put up?
I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I know for any public use airstrips where we had transmission lines, we would mark them in accordance with the FAA requirements, whether it's marker balls or lighted towers.
How many of you refused to put up?
At this, myself personally, I'm only aware this is the only case at this point we've not, but I'm not aware of any other requests for marker balls on private airstrips to MEAG.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. All right, who we got next? Representative Bryant. You waive. You were number 15, so we're going to waive you. Representative Gardner.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. When the easement was established, I mean, didn't you allow enough, didn't you arrange for enough easement for most any eventuality? I mean, how do you determine how much easement you acquire? Or
Well, we acquire the amount of easements that allows us to operate and maintain those electric power lines. For example, we have to clear the easement to keep vegetation from impacting the operation of the unit. So the easement is really created in order to allow us to operate and maintain that transmission structure.
But
so you can see the easement follows the transmission line, those cleared areas you see along the transmission.
Right.
Can I add a legal response to that as well? I think it's an oversimplistic thinking of easements to think of them as a right that ends at the geographic boundary that's described. And the reason I say that is because of express language that you can include in particular easements, which we did include in this one, that specifically and expressly, and I'm reading the language that I have quoted in the letter we sent to the property owner here relating to the easement, that the easement rights include protection of the safe and proper utilization of the rights, privileges, and interests in the easement, and the whole point of the easement is safely operating a transmission line. And it would also tremendously increase the cost of ratepayers if we had to purchase easement rights geographically all the way out to where a private airstrip might be.
Yeah. Is this dispute in court at this time?
It is not at this time.
So, but that's the expectation.
It was our hope when we sent the last letter that they would respond to us and take us up on our offer to get an independent aviation safety expert out there that could give some recommendations on what might be changed operationally to make it safe.
And there's not a dispute like this anywhere else in the state?
Not at this time that I'm aware of. There have been instances like this in the past, but not with MEAG that we've been involved in.
With Georgia Power or some other?
I'm aware of one with Georgia Power. I'm sure there are others.
That has been resolved?
That have been resolved.
Thank you.
Representative Ballinger.
I would like to make a motion if I could, Chairman.
Right.
Are we
Hold on one second, if you don't mind, Representative Ballinger. Representative Geisinger had a question. You pass. All right. Representative Ballinger?
I would like to make a motion that pending friendly amendment by Chairman Reinders that we do pass.
Okay. We have a motion do pass. Do I hear a second? We have a second. All right. Representative Reinders, or Chairman Reinders, what's your amendment?
Thank you, Chairman Reinders.
Wait. Let me turn you on. What number are you?
And thank you for turning me on. I just think to give the benefit of the doubt to MEAG to keep some owner from saying, I'll put it in a written, I just think we ought to have the same standard. So on line 27, after the word notice, of such written notice, after the word notice, I think we should use the same language as used in line 72, either by certified mail or statutory overnight delivery. Comma, and then continue, the owner of the utility line shall, I ain't even going to try to pronounce that word.
I'm glad. Because I don't think
my daddy didn't take me to pronunciation school before we got here.
Yeah. We don't have that in South Georgia. All right, did everybody get that? Jenna, did you get that? Everybody's got that? All right, at this time we're going to, we'll take action on the amendment. We have a motion. Do I hear a second on the amendment? Second. Got a second. All those in favor of Chairman Reinders' amendment, let it know by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, amendment passes. Now, we have action on HB 494 as amended. Do I hear a motion as amended? So moved. Do I have a second? Second. All those in favor of HB 494 as amended, let it know by saying aye. Hold on one second. Representative Williams, did you have something I missed you? Before I take action, I'm going to pull that back. Give you an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened very closely, and while I can empathize with the property owner, certainly private property rights are essential here in Georgia, but I have not seen where this is a problem that reaches the size that requires legislative intervention. We've got to stop talking about less government and keep piling on government. If this was a problem statewide, I could see it, but we've mentioned 2 or 3 cases in the whole state. I think we'll just, that's just unnecessary encroachment. But that's just my thought on that. I think this is a bit much.
You're going to get an opportunity here in just a second to make that known, Representative Williams. And I do respect you and like you a lot. That's why I give you the opportunity to have that say. Okay. At this point, we have a motion and we have a second. All those are in favor of passing HB 494 as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. I think the ayes clearly have it, unless y'all want to vote. Clearly have it. HB 494 as amended. We'll now move on to the Rules Committee with a do pass recommendation. Thank y'all. All right, we're not done. Where are you going? We got a couple more bills here.
It's rough, man. I'm telling you, Mr. Chairman, you got the whip.
Chairman Reinders, where are you going? We got.
I'm stretching.
You stretching? Okay.
That one took a lot out of me.
All right. Actually, next bill we're going to take. I have a do pass. Actually, just so y'all know, this is, and I'm going to give you a little history here about our wonderful Senate colleagues over there. We passed this bill out in the DOT housekeeping bill, and they're such strict constitutionalists over there that they believe sometimes that things aren't quite constitutional, so they decided to pull this part out of the bill. So we are now going to move it through with a regular bill, and it's the same exact wording that we had in there concerning the annual commercial record tow permits. So we've all passed it out before. If y'all would like any more discussion, I'll be glad to discuss it with you. If not, I'll be taking a motion that Chairman Reiner.
I make a motion to pass, Mr. Chairman.
Got a motion?
Second.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, of course there are none. All right. Now, let's move on to Res 16. Who's it? You got it? Okay. Let's move on to resolutions. We are going to pull out Resolution 513, which is Chairman Rogers. There's some issues with that we're trying to get worked out, so I'm going to pull that out because of the fact that maybe the appropriations chairman and our chairman of our caucus can get with him and see if we can't get the language worked out. We'd hope to have it, and they wasn't able to get it, so we're going to pull it out and we'll put it in the Senate bill when it comes over, unless they believe that's unconstitutional. And so, having said that, we didn't give y'all a list of every single resolution. One, trying to save paper. Two, because I don't think y'all wanted it all in your folders. But we actually have two resolutions today. One of them, as most of you know, you have been contacted about state patrols. And I'm going to ask, would you like to come forward and just speak to this real quick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Captain Paul Cosper, Legislative Liaison for the Department of Public Safety, and I got 20 days before I retire. We've had 27 people killed in the last 75 years in the line of duty. 3 of them have already been done in recent years, and I worked with those gentlemen. So the commissioner decided to go back and rename or name some roads after our fallen brethren, and we started with the first 10 that killed, started in 1940 all the way up to the early 60s. And we appreciate your consideration in the matter, and thank you very much.
We appreciate your service, too. And we appreciate actually you bringing this forward to us. But if you want to look through there, you can. But this is H.R. 411. It's on the state patrols. I don't hear Chairman Reiner.
Appropriate time motion to pass.
It's appropriate time. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Of course, there are none. I know on these. Thank y'all. Next set is, it'll start off, you'll see it's going to be under H.R. 46. For what we're going to list it as, it's the annual bridge and road dedications. But we are actually taking out H.R. 513, which is what I discussed with you earlier, which is Representative Carl Rogers. So I'm going to make a motion to remove that at this time. Do I hear a second? Second. All right. H.R. 513 is removed. So now, do any discussion on H.R. 46? Chair hearing none. So on H.R. 46 as amended.
Make a motion to pass.
I have a motion. There's a second. Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, thank y'all very much. Listen to me now. I know this is not something y'all want to hear, but I'm not going to be here tomorrow upon adjournment. Upon adjournment, I've got to be down in South Georgia at an event, so I'll be gone. But listen to me. Right now, we are planning on Monday morning at the bright hour of 8 o'clock having a transportation meeting unless something changes. So put it down. We'll get the notices sent out to you. Representative Williams has got a bill that we will be hearing at the time. And so I do need to try to make sure, if at all possible, y'all be here for that piece of legislation. There may be some others that may come on as well, but 8 o'clock Monday morning unless anything changes. And thank you. All right. At this point, we are adjourned. Thank y'all.